There are moments that cannot be explained by logic. A warm breath in a room where all the windows are closed. A faint scent of flowers in the middle of an office. Sudden goosebumps on the back of your neck when you think about an important decision. Most people dismiss these things. They attribute everything to fatigue, coincidence, or imagination. But in the spiritual traditions of different cultures, these sensations are described very precisely. And they recur with strange regularity, as if someone is nearby. Not loudly, not demonstratively, quietly. According to legends and spiritual testimonies, this is how guardian angels behave. They almost never appear openly. Their language is signs, and the problem is that most people expect something grand, when in fact the signals come in a much subtler form, and if you look closely, you can see a pattern. There are 7 signs that many people experience when their guardian angel may be nearby. 4 of them are subtle. They are more like reminders of their presence. The other 3 are completely different. They appear when a person needs to be urgently stopped or warned. The first sign often seems so insignificant that people almost always ignore it. Although it is the one that appears most often, we are talking about a strange change in temperature that cannot be explained. And now it is important to understand one detail, because this sign almost never occurs by accident. And here's the detail that most people miss. This change in temperature almost never looks like something sudden or dramatic. There is no storm, there is no draft, there is no obvious reason. On the contrary, everything happens very quietly. A person is sitting in a closed room. The air is stable. Nothing is moving, and suddenly, a slight flow of warm air, as if someone just walked by. Sometimes it's the opposite, a thin, cool breath. Short, almost imperceptible, like the touch of air on the skin. Many people automatically look for a logical explanation: ventilation, heating, random air movement. But something else is interesting. For many people, these moments coincide with their inner states, with important thoughts, with moments of doubt, or with moments when a person is faced with a decision. That's when this breath appears. In spiritual traditions, this is described as a change in the energy field around a person, not something loud, not something that can be easily detected by instruments, rather a brief sign. You are not alone in this situation, and it is interesting that people often feel one more detail. After such a moment, a strange inner calm appears, as if someone silently said, "Everything is under control." But sometimes the signal is different, not a touch of air, not a change in temperature, but something much stranger. Suddenly, a smell appears in the space that has no explanation. And this sign is so specific that people often remember it for years. Smell is one of the least understood signs, because it is almost impossible to deceive the sense of smell. The eyes can be mistaken, the ears can add something, but smell is a very specific signal. A person can be sitting in a regular office, in a car, or at home. No flowers nearby, no perfumes, no candles, and suddenly a distinct aroma appears. Sometimes it is the smell of flowers. Sometimes it is the light aroma of incense. Sometimes it is the warm, sweet smell of vanilla. And sometimes something even stranger happens. A person smells the perfume of a loved one who is not nearby. And sometimes they are no longer alive. This moment is so unexpected that many people literally freeze, because the smell appears abruptly. It lasts for a few seconds, and then disappears just as suddenly, without a source, without a logical explanation. In many spiritual traditions, such smells are called signs of presence. It is believed that the energy that enters our space can manifest itself through scent. And it is interesting that these moments almost always coincide with a person's inner state, when they are sad, when they ask for help, when they are facing an important decision. Sometimes this scent lasts only a few seconds, but the feeling after it remains for a long time. As if someone silently reminded them, you are not alone. But there is another signal that people describe in very similar terms, even if they have never heard of such signs. It is not related to the air. It is not related to smells. It arises directly in the body, and it usually starts with a strange sensation on the crown of the head. Subtle, but very distinct. This sensation is difficult to confuse with anything else. It is not cold. It is not the usual tingling sensation caused by emotions. It is more like a subtle tingling or a slight tickling sensation on the top of the head, as if someone very gently touched the top of your head. And it appears suddenly, without any physical cause, without any movement of air, without any change in temperature. A person can just be sitting, reading, thinking about something important, and suddenly feel this impulse. Many people instinctively run their hand through their hair, as if to check what it was, but there is nothing there. In various spiritual traditions, the crown of the head is called the point of reception of subtle information, a place through which a person can feel energy impulses. That is why many people describe this moment in very similar terms. First, a short electrical impulse, then a slight warmth or a wave of goosebumps running down the neck. And most interestingly, this signal often occurs at the moment of thought, when a person is thinking intensely about something, when they are in doubt, when they are asking themselves questions internally, as if the answer comes not in words, but in a short, energetic impulse. Some describe it as confirmation, some describe it as a warning, but almost everyone agrees on one thing. After such a moment, a person suddenly understands their thoughts more clearly, as if someone has illuminated the right direction. And here comes another sign that is difficult to ignore, because it starts to repeat itself. On the clock, on receipts, on license plates, the same combination of numbers, again and again. And very often it is 1111. At first it seems like a coincidence. A person looks at their phone, 1111. A few hours later they glance at the display in a store, the same numbers again. Later the license plate of the car in front of them consists of the same combination. Once, a coincidence. Twice, strange. But when it starts to happen all the time, a person can't help but wonder. Why these numbers? In spiritual psychology, this phenomenon is called synchronicity. It is the moment when events in the outside world begin to coincide in a strange way with a person's inner thoughts. And the most interesting thing happens at the very moment when this sign appears. Almost always, a person is thinking intensely about something, about a decision, about a risk, about a change in life, and that's when they see repeating numbers. It's as if someone is very carefully saying, "Pay attention to this moment." In many spiritual traditions, such combinations are considered a language of signs, not a direct message, but a gentle nudge towards awareness, because angels, according to these beliefs, rarely intervene directly. They do not force, they do not command, they only highlight the moment when a person stands at an important crossroads, and the four signs we just talked about are usually felt very softly. A change in the air, an unfamiliar scent, a pulse on the crown of the head, repeating numbers. It's more of a reminder. There is support nearby. But there is another side to it, because sometimes the role of a guardian angel is not just to support. Sometimes his task is to stop a person when they are about to take a dangerous step. And it is at such moments that the signs become much stronger. Most people describe the first one in very similar terms, a sudden feeling of anxiety, for no apparent reason. This feeling is not like ordinary nervousness. It comes suddenly, and it is very clearly felt in the body. It's as if a stone appears in your stomach, a tightening, an alarming impulse that is difficult to ignore. Outwardly, everything may look completely normal. The same road, the same route, the same conversation. But inside there is a very strong feeling, something is wrong. Many people try to suppress it. They blame it on fatigue, on emotions, a random fear. And yet, one pattern occurs very often in life. When people ignore this feeling, it later turns out that the danger was real. A meeting that would have been better to skip, a road where an accident occurred, a decision that could have led to serious problems. In spiritual traditions, this is explained simply. A guardian angel cannot always change events directly, but he can activate a person's intuition. That is why the signal comes not in words, but in physical sensations, anxiety that literally forces you to stop and rethink the situation. Sometimes a person listens to this signal and simply changes their route, postpones the trip, refuses to make a decision, and then finds out that it was the right choice. But sometimes the sign comes even harder, not through feelings, but through real obstacles that literally stand in the way. What if the equipment starts to behave strangely? The phone freezes, the car suddenly won't start, or the keys disappear just when you need to leave the house. And these little things may seem like ordinary annoyances, but sometimes they appear at the very moment when a person needs to be delayed. The person is in a hurry. Everything has already been decided. The plan has been made. And suddenly a chain of strange obstacles begins. The phone freezes just when you need to call a taxi. The keys disappear in the apartment, even though they were on the table a minute ago. The car, which always started with half a turn of the key, suddenly falls silent. The first reaction is irritation. It seems like just an unfortunate coincidence, but sometimes these delays change the course of events. A person is a few minutes late, or they cancel the trip altogether, and only later does it become clear that at that very moment there was an accident on the road, or the meeting they were rushing to turned into a serious conflict. In spiritual traditions, such moments are described as a forced pause, when a person needs to be literally stopped, not with words, not through visions, but through small, yet very specific obstacles. Because sometimes the easiest way to change the future is simply to delay a person for a few minutes. And many people, recalling such moments, say the same phrase. It's good that something went wrong then. But there is another signal, the rarest, and at the same time, the strongest. It is described by people of different ages, different cultures, and even different beliefs. It is the moment when a clear, short command suddenly sounds in your head, not like a normal thought, and not like an internal monologue, more like a voice that appears suddenly and speaks very specifically. Stop, or don't do that. And strangely enough, this voice sounds calm, without panic, without chaos, just firm, as if someone older and wiser is intervening in your thoughts for a second. And at such moments, people often pause. They stop, they look around, and only then do they realize how important that brief signal was. That is why many spiritual traditions talk about one simple thing. Angels almost never appear the way we expect them to. They do not perform grandiose miracles. They do not break the laws of the world. They work quietly, through feelings, through signs, through coincidences that may not actually be coincidences at all. And when a person begins to notice these signals, their perception of the world gradually changes. They begin to listen to themselves more carefully. They ignore their intuition less, and they trust more those moments that previously seemed strange, because sometimes the most important signs come not when we are looking for them, but when we really need support or a warning. And it is at such moments that people suddenly understand one simple thing. Perhaps someone has been standing next to them all this time, quietly, unnoticed, but very attentively. But there is one thing that needs to be understood. These signs almost never come out of nowhere. They do not occur every day and do not repeat themselves mechanically. Most often they appear at moments of inner change, when a person is faced with a decision, when they have lost their bearings, when life brings them to a point where they have to make a choice. That's when the space around them seems to change. A a sudden breath of air, an unfamiliar scent, a pulse on the crown of the head, repeating numbers, and sometimes stronger signals, anxiety that forces you to stop, obstacles that disrupt plans, a voice that sounds short and firm inside. If you look at these 7 signs together, one pattern becomes clear. Angels do not control a person's life. They do not make decisions for them. Their role is different: to highlight the moment, to warn, to encourage attentiveness, as if someone is standing next to you and quietly saying, "Look more closely." And it's interesting that most people have experienced something like this at least once in their lives: a strange smell, an inexplicable anxiety, an impossible coincidence. But they quickly find an explanation and let go of the thought. And yet, sometimes it's worth pausing, stopping for a second, and just asking yourself, what if some things in our lives aren't just coincidences? What if some delays are actually saving us? What if some feelings are a way to reach out to us? Perhaps we don't always understand these signs. Perhaps sometimes we ignore them. But when a person begins to pay more attention to such moments, they suddenly notice something strange. The world around them becomes a little deeper. It takes on more meaning, more connections, more quiet hints. And then life no longer looks like a chaotic set of events. It begins to resemble a path, where sometimes someone walks alongside us whom we cannot see, but sometimes we can feel them. And if you've ever had moments like this, a strange smell, an unexpected breath of air, or a number that haunts you all day, maybe you shouldn't dismiss it. Maybe it's just a sign, a quiet one, barely noticeable, but very important. And there's one more detail that is rarely talked about. People often think that signs should be bright, almost supernatural. Light, voices, something that cannot be confused. But in reality, almost all evidence suggests the opposite. The most important signals come quietly, and so naturally that they are easy to miss. That is why many people only notice them in hindsight, when something has already happened, when it becomes clear that that strange smell was present at a moment of intense sadness. That anxiety appeared before a dangerous trip, that the delay saved them from trouble, and then the person suddenly remembers the signs were there. They just looked too ordinary. And perhaps there is a certain wisdom in this, because if these signals were loud and obvious, a person would lose the most important thing: choice. Angels, according to spiritual traditions, do not force, they do not control a person's life. They only remind, sometimes through the warmth of the air, sometimes through a smell, sometimes through strange synchronicity, and sometimes through anxiety that forces them to stop. That is why people who begin to pay attention to such signs gradually change one simple habit. They stop rushing. They begin to listen, not just the noise of the world, but also the quiet signals within themselves. And at some point, a very interesting feeling arises, as if life ceases to be random, as if some events are connected by invisible threads. And then a simple but powerful thought arises. Perhaps we are never completely alone. Perhaps there is someone nearby who does not interfere with every step, but watches very closely when we are faced with an important choice. And if you've ever had signs like this in your life, a breath of air that can't be explained, a scent that came out of nowhere, a strange feeling on the top of your head, or an inner voice that suddenly said, "Stop." Maybe it wasn't a random moment. Perhaps it was silent help, the same help that people call, very simply, the presence of a guardian angel. And one more thing that changes everything: when a person begins to notice these signals, they suddenly realize something unexpected. Signs almost never come when life is calm and predictable. They appear at points of tension, before an important conversation, before a trip, before a decision that could change the course of events. It's as if Someone is watching these moments closely, and here's what's interesting. People who have started to pay attention to such signals often notice one pattern. At first, the sign is very subtle, barely noticeable, a light breath of air, a brief scent, repeated numbers, easy. But if a person ignores this signal, the signs become stronger. First, there is inner anxiety, then obstacles, and sometimes even that same brief inner voice. It's as if the system of hints works in stages, a gentle reminder, then a warning, and only then, a stronger signal. And if you look at it from the outside, it becomes clear why these signs seem so strange. They are not imposed. They leave room for choice. A person can listen, or they can ignore it. And that's why these moments are so easy to dismiss as coincidence. But sometimes when a person begins to remember their life, they suddenly notice something strange. At the most critical moments, there was always something nearby that tried to stop or support them. A strange smell, an inexplicable delay, repeating numbers, an inner signal. And then a question arises that many people ask themselves only once in their lives. What if these signs were not accidental? What if there really was someone nearby whose role was not to interfere with every step, but to stand quietly nearby at the most important moments of our lives? Perhaps this is what real protection looks like. Not loud, not noticeable, but very attentive. And if, after watching this video, you suddenly remember moments when something strange happened at just the right time, don't be quick to dismiss it. Sometimes the most important things in our lives come in the form of quiet signs. Signs that most people don't even notice. But for those who begin to see them, the world suddenly becomes completely different. And here's where it gets really interesting. When a person begins to notice these signs, a very quiet but profound shift takes place within them. They begin to look at ordinary things differently. A delay no longer seems like just a setback. A strange feeling in the body no longer seems accidental, and repeating numbers cease to be just a game of statistics. Gradually, a new attentiveness emerges. A person begins to notice the moment between events. That second, when it is still possible to change a decision. When it is still possible to stop. And it is at this moment that many people truly listen to themselves for the first time. Not fear, not haste, but a deeper inner signal. And then something interesting happens. Decisions begin to become more accurate. Routes change in time. Some problems simply do not occur. Not because life has become perfect, but because people have learned to notice the clues. And perhaps this is the main meaning of all these signs. Not to prove the existence of something supernatural, but to teach people to be more attentive to the moment in which they live. Because sometimes life speaks to us very quietly, through feelings, through strange coincidences, through inner impulses, and only those who do not rush to dismiss these moments suddenly begin to see a pattern. As if there is an additional level of clues in the world. Not intrusive, not loud, but present. And perhaps this is what people mean when they talk about a guardian angel. Not a being that decides everything for us, but a quiet presence that sometimes helps us take a step in the right direction. So if that strange moment ever appears in your life, a sudden breath of warm air, an unexpected scent, a number that repeats itself over and over, or a quiet inner voice that suddenly says, stop. Maybe you should do one simple thing. Don't rush. Pause. And look closely at what is happening. Because sometimes the most important signs come not to surprise us, but to protect us. And here it is worth saying one very honest thing. No one can prove these signs the way formulas or physical laws are proven. They cannot be weighed. They cannot be measured. But there is something else. Thousands of people in different countries describe the same feelings, the same smells, the same strange coincidences, the same moments when an inner signal made them suddenly change their minds. And many of these stories end the same way. The person says, I don't know what it was, but it's good that I stopped then. Perhaps that is the main idea. Signs are not created to convince skeptics. They are created to prompt those who are ready to listen. Sometimes all it takes is a second of attention. One inner wait. One look at the situation from a different angle, and suddenly the path changes. That is why many spiritual traditions say a very simple phrase. A guardian angel does not lead a person by the hand. He only stands nearby. He observes, he warns, sometimes he supports, but the final choice always remains with the person. And perhaps that is what makes these signs so quiet. They do not force, they only remind that life is not always a chaos of coincidences, that sometimes strange delays can be protection, that intuition sometimes speaks louder than logic. And if, after watching this video, you suddenly start to notice any of these 7 signs, don't rush to make loud conclusions. Just remember the moment. Pay attention to the thought that was in your head, to the decision you were about to make, to the path you wanted to take. Sometimes it is in these small details that a hint is hidden. Quiet, almost imperceptible, but perhaps very important. Because sometimes the strongest help in life does not look like a miracle, but like a barely noticeable sign that appears exactly when it is needed most. And yet there is one thought that makes you look at these signs even more deeply. Perhaps the main purpose of these signals is not just protection. Perhaps they exist to remind a person to be attentive to life. When we live on autopilot, we notice almost nothing. Decisions are made in a hurry. Roads are chosen mechanically. Internal signals are lost in the noise of daily affairs. But when a person stops for at least a second, the world begins to look different. Suddenly, it becomes noticeable how events are connected, how strange coincidences appear at just the right moment, how sometimes the simplest delay can change the whole day. And then a very interesting feeling arises, as if life is not entirely chaotic, as if there is a subtle logic to it that we rarely notice. Perhaps that is why ancient spiritual texts have always said the same thing. A guardian angel does not make choices for a person. It only reminds them that choices exist through the warmth of the air, through the smell, through repeating numbers, through an inner voice. These signals are not meant to cause fear. They are meant to encourage mindfulness for that rare moment when a person stops rushing forward and begins to truly look at what is happening. And if at least once in your life you had a moment when something strange stopped you, maybe it wasn't a coincidence. Maybe it was that same quiet push that many people call very simply presence, quiet, unnoticeable, but sometimes very timely. And perhaps the wisest thing we can do when we encounter such moments is not to rush to explain them. Just pause, listen, and remember one simple thing. Sometimes the most important signs in our lives come so quietly that only those who are ready to listen can hear them. And perhaps the most important realization comes later, not at the moment when the sign appeared, but years later, when a person looks back and suddenly begins to notice a strange chain of events. That day when she was late for the train, that meeting that was suddenly canceled, that road she decided not to take for some reason. At that moment, it all seemed like a minor inconvenience, like a coincidence. But over time, a different perspective emerges. Sometimes it is precisely those moments when something went wrong that turn out to be moments when something saved us. That is why many people who have experienced similar situations say the same thing. I don't know why it happened, but it's good that it did. And perhaps that is the whole point. Signs are not always immediately understandable. Sometimes their meaning only becomes clear after some time, when it becomes apparent that one small pause changed a whole chain of events. And if you think about it more deeply, a very simple but powerful thought arises. Perhaps in every person's life, there are moments when they are protected, not loudly, not demonstratively, but very quietly, through small signals, through strange coincidences, through inner feelings. And perhaps that is why these signs seem so inconspicuous, because they are not meant to force. They are only reminders that sometimes it is worth stopping. Sometimes it is worth listening to yourself. Sometimes it is worth changing your decision, even if logic says otherwise. And if, after watching this video, you suddenly start noticing such moments in your life, don't rush to dismiss them. Maybe they mean nothing, or maybe they mean a lot. Sometimes a single quiet signal is enough for a person to take a different step. And it is this step that can change their entire path. Because sometimes the most important help in life does not come as a miracle, but as a barely noticeable sign that appears just when it is needed most. And there is one more thing that people often realize only with time. These signs almost never appear where there is no choice. They come precisely when a person has several paths open to them, when you can still go left or right, say yes or refuse. At such moments, the world seems to freeze for a second, and that's when that same quiet signal appears. A light breath of air, an unexpected scent, a brief sensation on the crown of your head, repeating numbers, or stronger signs, anxiety, a delay, an inner voice. It's not an order, it's not coercion, it's more like a reminder of responsibility for your own choices, as if someone nearby is saying, "Look more closely, this moment is important." And when a person begins to notice these moments, they suddenly discover a very simple truth. We make most of our decisions in life automatically, almost without thinking, but it is those seconds when we stop and really listen to ourselves that often change everything. It is then that a person can see what they did not notice before: danger, a mistake, or conversely, an opportunity. And perhaps that is why these signs seem so subtle. They should not be frightening. They should attract attention, quietly, almost imperceptibly, so that a person can take the next step themselves. And if that strange moment ever appears in your life, a sudden breath of warm air in a closed room, a scent that is impossible to explain, numbers that haunt you throughout the day, or a brief inner signal that says, "Stop," perhaps it is worth doing something very simple. Don't rush. Pause. Look at the situation again, because sometimes it is in those moments that a person receives a quiet hint that can change the entire direction of their life. And perhaps this is the true role of a guardian angel, not to guide our path, but to be there in those moments when we need one little hint the most. And yet there is one final point that changes the perception of these signs. Most people think that a guardian angel only appears in times of danger, only when there is a need to save. But ancient spiritual texts paint a different picture. Their presence can be nearby much more often than we think. Not to interfere, not to control every step, but to sometimes very quietly remind a person of one simple thing: their life matters. That is why the signs almost always look the same. They are small, barely noticeable, almost natural. A breath of warm air, a scent that cannot be explained, a slight tingling on the crown of the head. Numbers that repeat themselves over and over again. And when the situation becomes really serious, stronger signals appear. Sudden anxiety, delays, an inner voice. None of this is like a loud miracle. It's more like a language of quiet hints. And perhaps the most interesting discovery is this: when a person begins to pay attention to these moments, they gradually change one simple habit. They begin to trust their intuition more. They stop ignoring those inner signals that previously seemed easier to dismiss, and life begins to look a little different. There is more attentiveness in it, more awareness, more quiet moments when a person feels that something is pointing them in the right direction. Perhaps that is why many people who have experienced similar moments say the same thing: "I can't explain it, but I felt like someone stopped me." Sometimes these words sound like a poetic metaphor, and sometimes like a very personal experience. And perhaps the truth here is simple. We don't always see those who are close to us. We don't always understand the signs, but sometimes life gives us a little hint just when we need it most. And if, after watching this video, you suddenly start noticing strange coincidences, a smell that came out of nowhere, a number that appears again and again, or a quiet inner signal that says, stop. Maybe it's just a coincidence, or maybe it's one of those moments when your guardian angel is standing nearby. Continue, and there's one more thing that's almost never mentioned when talking about guardian angels. We often imagine them as those who come only at critical moments, only when danger threatens. But many spiritual traditions describe something else. Their presence next to a person may be constant, but the signals appear only when they make sense, when there is a moment of choice, when there is risk, when there is a chance to take a step that will change the future path. And then those little details that most people don't notice appear in life. A slight breath of air, a smell that comes out of nowhere, an unexpected tingling sensation on the crown of the head, numbers that repeat with strange accuracy, and sometimes stronger signals, anxiety that squeezes inside, obstacles that destroy the plan, a voice in your head that speaks briefly and clearly. And all these signals have one thing in common. They never force, they only remind, as if someone nearby is saying very calmly, think again. That's why these signs are easy to ignore. We are used to trusting only what can be explained by logic, because it has a clear reason, but life sometimes works a little more complicated. Sometimes a small delay can save you from a big problem. Sometimes a sudden anxiety can distract you from a dangerous decision. Sometimes an inner voice can stop us at the right moment. And when a person begins to notice these moments, they suddenly discover a new habit. They begin to listen to themselves more carefully, not to rush into a decision, to give themselves a second to pause, to pay attention to what previously seemed random. And it is this attentiveness that sometimes changes more than any advice, because in the end, no one can live our lives for us, not even a guardian angel. He doesn't make choices. He just stands by in those moments when we are at a crossroads. Sometimes he supports us, sometimes he warns us, but he always leaves the most important thing to the person, the right to take their own step. And perhaps that is why these signs are so quiet, so that we can hear them only when we are truly ready to listen. And perhaps the most interesting discovery comes when a person begins to treat these signals not as mysticism, but as a reminder to be attentive to their own life. Because if you look closely, most of these 7 signs do one simple thing. They make you stop for a second. A breath of air, and a person looks around. A strange scent, and they step out of the flow of thoughts, a tingling sensation on the crown of the head, and attention returns to the moment, repeating numbers, and the question arises, why now? Even anxiety works the same way. It literally forces the body to say, wait. Obstacles do the same thing. Keys get lost, the phone freezes, the car won't start, and suddenly, the plan falls apart. But sometimes it's those few minutes of pause that change everything. Because in those seconds, a person steps out of automatic mode, and that's when they can see what they didn't notice before. Danger, a wrong decision, or a missed opportunity. Perhaps that is why all these signs have one thing in common. They do not look like miracles. They look like moments of awareness. And perhaps there is a very simple wisdom in this. A guardian angel does not always change events. Sometimes it just creates a moment in which a person can change their choice. And it is this moment that sometimes saves more than any miracle. Because real help does not always come in the form of a loud sign. Sometimes it looks like a small delay, like an incomprehensible feeling, like a thought that suddenly stops you before you take a step. And if such moments have ever happened in your life, don't rush to dismiss them. Maybe it was just a coincidence. But sometimes it is coincidences that become those points at which a person suddenly realizes there are a little more connections in the world than we are used to noticing. And perhaps it is in these quiet moments that there is a presence next to us that cannot be seen, but can sometimes be felt.